Hello everybody, my name is V. Narendra Kumar and we are from NRK Academy, and today we are going to be reading out the 11th chapter of this wonderful book called A Short History of the World by H.G. Wells. And the 11th chapter is The First True Men. We have already gone through the first 10 chapters and you can go back to that. And we have arrived from the beginning of the forming of the earth till now with all the life forms coming. 11th chapter, The First True Men. How we came, you and me. 11th chapter, The First True Men. The earliest signs and traces at present known to science of a humanity which is indisputably, which means no doubt, kindred with ourselves, like us, have been found in Western Europe and particularly in France and Spain. Bones, weapons, scratchings upon bone and rock, carved fragments of bone and paintings in caves and upon rock surfaces dating, it is supposed, from 30,000 years ago or more have been discovered in both these countries. Spain is at present the richest country in the world, and in these first relics of our real human ancestors. Of course, our present collections of these things are the merest beginnings of the accumulations we may hope for in the future, when there are searches enough to make a thorough examination of all possible sources, and when other countries in the world now inaccessible to archaeologists have been explored in some detail. The greater part of Africa and Asia has never even been traversed yet by a trained observer interested in these matters and free to explore, and we must be very careful therefore not to conclude that the early true men were distinctively inhabitants of Western Europe or that they first appeared in that region. Anyway, this book is dated, it is written much before, so now further researches have been done. In Asia or Africa or submerged beneath the sea of today, there may be richer and much earlier deposits of real human remains than anything that has yet come to light. I write in Asia or Africa and I do not mention America, because so far there have been no finds at all of any of the higher primates, either of great apes, submen, Neanderthalers, nor early true men. This development of life seems to have been an exclusively old world development, and it was only apparently at the end of the old Stone Age that human beings first made their way across the land connection that is now cut by Bering Straits into the American continent. The walls of the caves are covered in these representations of bulls, etc., painted in the soft tones of red shaded to black. They may be 15 or 20,000 years old. These first real human beings we know of in Europe appear already to have belonged to one or other of at least two very distinct races. One of these races was of a very high type indeed. It was tall and big-brained. One of the women's skulls found exceeds in capacity that of the average man of today. One of the men's skeletons is over 6 feet in height. The physical type resembled that of the North American Indian. From the Cro-Magnon cave in which the first skeletons were found, these people have been called Cro-Magnards. They were savages, but savages of a high order. The second race, the race of the Grimaldi cave remains, was distinctly Negroid in its characters. Its nearest living affinities are the Bushmen and Hottentots of South Africa. It is interesting to find at the very outset of the known human story that mankind was already racially divided into at least two main varieties, and one is tempted to such unwarrantable guesses as that the former race was probably brownish rather than black, and that it came from the east or north, and the latter was blackish rather than brown and came from the equatorial south. And these savages of perhaps 40,000 years ago, were so human that they pierced shells to make necklaces, painted themselves, carved images of bone and stone, scratched figures on rocks and bones, and painted rude but often very able sketches of beasts and the like upon the smooth walls of caves and upon inviting rock surfaces. They made a great variety of implements, much smaller in scale and finer than those of the Neanderthal men. We have now in our museums great quantities of their implements, their statuettes, their rock drawings, and the like. The earliest of them were hunters. The earliest of them were hunters. Their chief pursuit was the wild horse, the little bearded pony of that time. They followed it as it moved after pasture. And also they followed the bison. They knew the mammoth because they have left us strikingly effective pictures of that creature. To judge by one rather ambiguous drawing, they trapped and killed it. They hunted with spears and throwing stones. They do not seem to have had the bow, and it is doubtful if they had yet learned to tame any animals. They had no dogs. There is one carving of a horse's head and one or two drawings that suggest a bridled horse with a twisted skin or tendon around it. But the little horses of that age and region could not have carried a man, and if the horse was domesticated, it was used as a led horse. It is doubtful and improbable. It is doubtful and improbable that they had yet learnt the rather unnatural use of animals' milk as food. They do not seem to have erected any buildings. Though they may have had tents of skins and though they made clay figures, they never rose to the making of pottery. Since they had no cooking implements, their cookery must have been rudimentary or non-existent. They knew nothing. They knew nothing of cultivation and nothing of any sort of basket work or woven cloth, except for the robes of skin or fur. They were naked, painted savages. These earliest known men hunted the open steppes of Europe for 100 centuries perhaps, and then slowly drifted and changed before a change of climate. Europe century by century was growing milder and damper. Wet reindeer receded northward and eastward, and bison and horse followed. The steppes gave way to forests, and red deer took the place of horse and bison. There is a change in the character of the implements with this change in their application. River and lake fishing becomes of great importance to men, and fine implements of bone increased. The bone needles of this age, says de Motillet, are much superior to those of later, even historical times down to the Renaissance. The Romans, for example, never had needles comparable to those of this epoch. That's very interesting. Almost 15 or 12,000 years ago, a fresh people drifted into the south of Spain and left very remarkable drawings of themselves upon exposed rock faces there. These were the Azilians, named from the Masdizil cave. They had the bow. They seem to have worn feather headdresses. They drew vividly, but also they had reduced their drawings to a sort of symbolism. A man, for instance, would be represented by a vertical dab with 2 or 3 horizontal dabs that suggest the dawn of the writing idea. Against hunting sketches, there are often marks like tallies. One drawing shows 2 men smoking out a bee's nest. Among the most recent discoveries of Paleolithic art are these specimens found in 1920 in Spain. They are probably 10 or 12,000 years old. These are the latest of the men that we call Paleolithic, Old Stone Age, because they had only chipped implements, sharpened. By 10 or 12,000 years, a new sort of life has dawned in Europe. Men have learned not only to chip, but to polish and grind stone implements, and they have begun cultivation. The Neolithic, New Stone Age was beginning. It is interesting to note that less than a century ago, there still survived in a remote part of the world, from now, in Tasmania, a race of human beings at a lower level of physical and intellectual development than any of these earliest races of mankind who have left traces in Europe. These people had long ago been cut off by geographical changes from the rest of the species and from stimulation and improvement. They seem to have degenerated rather than developed. They lived a base life subsisting upon shellfish and small game. They had no habitations but only squatting places. They were real men of our species, but they had neither the manual dexterity, skill, nor the artistic powers of the first true men. And that completes the 11th chapter. And in a certain sense, the coming of man has been completed in 11 chapters, brilliantly, beautifully by H.G. Wells. In 11 chapters, he has shown from how we came from a swirling mass from space, formation of Earth, coming of life, small life, and then slowly going to reptiles, dinosaurs, and slowly how the half man and finally the first true man. Now begins the real history, the cultural history of us, of men and women. This is the 12th chapter. We'll be doing it in the next video. Thank you.